Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today regarding CMS's potential upcoming change in Section 111 reporting requirements for work comp settlements. My name is Heather Sanderson. I'm the CEO and founder of Sanderson Firm, PLLC. We are a nationwide Medicare secondary payer compliance firm. We service self-insured entities, third-party administrators, and insurance companies nationwide with MSP compliance. I've personally been in the Medicare secondary payer industry for 15 years, dedicating my entire legal career to Medicare secondary payer, and started Sanderson Firm 3 years ago. And I'm delighted to be joined today by one of the brightest and most upcoming minds in Medicare secondary payer, Brendan D'Souza. Brendan D'Souza has also been with Sanderson Firm for over 2 years now. We previously worked together at a company called Franco Signor, where Brendan was also Associate Compliance Counsel. And we're going to go ahead and get started today and talk about this, this potential change that might come about here from Medicare requiring potentially the reporting of work comp MSA information. So just recently, on November 13th, just a few weeks ago, CMS hosted a webinar regarding the potential future expansion of Section 111 reporting requirements to include MSA information for Medicare beneficiary settlements. So we decided that we would like to explain this potential change to you all live and give you some information about what that might entail. And I know we're saying the word potential a lot. We did notice that Medicare seemed to indicate on this webinar that this was not set in stone. This seemed to be more of an intention to eventually implement, but that's not for sure that it's going to happen. But we're going to talk to you about some of the background, the technical details, the timeframes, and then we're going to share our perspective on this and what we think Medicare is going to do and how this might impact MSAs, if at all. So for those of you that are not familiar with Section 111 reporting, Section 111 was enacted as part of the Medicare and Medicaid S-CHIP Extension Act of 2007. Basically, the reason behind Section 111 reporting was because before Section 111 reporting, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services was essentially in the dark as to claims and settlements occurring with Medicare beneficiaries because they would only find out about them if let's say a Medicare beneficiary's attorneys would self-report voluntarily this information to Medicare. Medicare needs to know about workers' compensation claims and settlements and general liability claims and settlements and no-fault claims and settlements because that's how they recover their conditional payments, those payments that they make pre-settlement to which they're owed reimbursement. So this was a transparency mechanism for Medicare to learn about your Medicare beneficiary settlement. So it was enacted in 2010, enacted in 2007 and went into effect in 2010. And we've been doing the reporting since then. And the other purpose behind Section 111 reporting is also so that Medicare can coordinate benefits for the Medicare beneficiaries as well. And you might have heard, and this is not our topic for today, but you might have heard, and if you would like more information, please feel free to attend our previous webinars or look at our blogs. But just recently, Medicare did finalize the final rule on civil money penalties up to $1,000 per day per claim. And Medicare will start issuing penalties here within the next year or two against those non-compliant insurers for failure to timely report ongoing responsibility for medical and failure to timely report total payment obligation to claimant, so settlements, right? So on this webinar that Medicare hosted on November 13th, they said they're looking to expand the Section 111 reporting process to capture information on all work comp claims involving Medicare beneficiaries that report settlement and have a work comp MSA. So Medicare did discuss on this webinar that they were looking to not only capture traditional work comp MSA information. So let's say the MSA was submitted to Medicare for review and approval. They still want the MSA amount reported as well. Or if you utilized a non-submit Medicare set aside, you can still you would still need to report that as well as part of this new requirement. So they want to know about submitted MSAs as well as non-submitted MSAs in your Section 111 data. It seems like that Medicare really wants this data so that they can properly coordinate benefits for Medicare beneficiaries and recoup these conditional payments. Further, Medicare commented that they're not always provided with the work comp MSA information or finalized settlement documents post settlement. We did actually lodge a question in the Medicare during the webinar saying, why are you looking for this information on submitted MSAs when your work comp review contractor already has the submitted MSA information? And they said that a lot of times they don't receive the finalized settlement documents post settlement, so they don't know if the parties, if in fact did end up settling with the CMS approved MSA amount. So this would give them that information. And regardless of whether, the MSA was actually reported or submitted under the voluntary work comp MSA process, basically they were looking for this information. And also, even if there's ongoing responsibility for some injuries and not others, but they would want to have this information. This would be submitted for all work comp TPOCs, regardless of the TPOC value. But they did comment that the TPOC thresholds would still apply. One thing that's important to note also on this webinar is that Medicare did mention numerous times that the CMS review process of MSAs is voluntary, remains voluntary, and they did not make any comments discrediting non-submit MSAs. I think, in fact, they actually gave credit to non-submit evidence-based MSAs and said they'd still want to know about that information, not necessarily to question that non-submit MSA, but just so that they can properly perform benefits.
Okay, so thanks, Heather. So we know the why. So clearly there is this information gap with CMS. Even for MSAs that are submitted to Medicare, as Heather mentioned, Medicare doesn't know for certain that the settlement actually did occur with the Medicare set aside that was approved by CMS, because sometimes parties just don't submit the full settlement paperwork to Medicare post settlement, even though that is a requirement if the parties voluntarily submit to the CMS submission process. So there's this gap. We know why. So, okay, what is the information that CMS is going to be collecting? And you'll see here, they're only looking for about 7 fields here, seven pretty basic standard stuff, right? So CMS is going to want to know, going to want to know, one, what is the actual MSA amount? Of course, Medicare is going to want to know the MSA period, meaning Medicare wants to know essentially the life expectancy of the individual claimant. So, as many of you know, when you prepare an MSA, you're calculating up to the life expectancy of the individual. So, if someone's got a 20-year LE, you prepare an allocation for how much Medicare covered claim related treatment that individual will need for presumably their natural remaining life expectancy, right? So in that MSA period, if they have, like, let's say a 20-year LE, that number would just simply be 20. Medicare is also going to want to know how this MSA is going to be funded. Is it going to be funded via one lump sum, or is it going to be funded via an annuity with payments made yearly? If it's funded via annuity, Medicare is going to want to know the initial deposit amount, and they're also going to want to know the annual amount that's deposited thereafter. This one here, this next one, this case control number actually is interesting. So Medicare is going to want to know the case control number if the parties submitted the allocation to CMS for review and approval. Obviously, as Heather mentioned before, this does not apply to only MSAs that were submitted to CMS. You're going to have to report data that's for non-submitted MSAs and for submitted allocations as well. But this particular field makes me wonder, okay, you have this case control number, but let's say, in a normal case, it's not an issue. Let's say you submit an allocation for $50,000 to Medicare, it's approved, the claim settles, you report $50,000 in the MSA field, TPOC's reported, everything's all good. What happens if you take that same file where you prepare an MSA for $50,000, and let's say the file gets developed, and let's say for whatever reason the parties decide, you know what, hey, actually don't feel like waiting for CMS's determination. I don't feel like providing Medicare with medical records, which may or may not exist, which is potentially why the MSA got developed in the first place. And let's say the parties say, hey, we initially thought $50,000 would be appropriate, but let's say 2 years down the line, the case has not settled. medical treatment has changed in that 2 years. What if the person improved and you get an updated allocation, hopefully from us, and the allocation is reduced to $10,000? When you're reporting that TPOC, Medicare is going to have that case control number. They're going to see, okay, interesting, you filed this allocation for $50,000, but you're reporting a TPOC with an MSA of $10,000. Why is that? Is that going to raise a flag with CMS? Is CMS going to think that's potentially a burden shift? Will that trigger something on CMS's end where they say, okay, if you don't spend that $50,000 that you initially contemplated, we're just not going to pay for this individual's claim-related medical care. So I see this one potentially being an issue if CMS is truly looking for case control numbers on all MSAs that were submitted, even if they were withdrawn or simply never finalized after a development letter. So that this one would be something to watch for in the future. And then lastly here, Medicare is going to want to know the professional administrator's EIN number. Essentially, if you use a professional outfit like in a Mitros, they're going to want to know, okay, who is this company that's professionally administering these allocations? Okay, so we know what the information is that Medicare is looking for. So how is this information going to be utilized? So if you are involved in a workers' compensation claim involving a Medicare beneficiary, Medicare has what's called a common working file, where Medicare populates all this information related to the settlement and related to the beneficiary. As part of this new potential process, Medicare is going to post a WCMSA record, which will prevent payment of medical services related to injuries described by the diagnosis codes. And by the way, this sentence here is sort of copied and pasted from what CMS actually said. So this is interesting, right? So a WCMSA record will be posted to the common working file preventing payment of medical services related to the injuries described by the diagnosis codes. So as some of you may or may not be aware, when you are reporting a TPOC to CMS through Section 111, Medicare is looking for not only claim-related, injury-related ICD diagnosis codes. Medicare is also expecting for denied injuries to be reported through that TPOC. Since this WCMSA requirement is associated with the TPOC field, it would seem that that WCMSA record that Medicare is going to be referencing is going to have a bunch of injuries. So let's say you are, I don't know, Johnny Johnson, and you have this MSA for, $50,000, and let's say through the TPOC, let's say he fell and hit his head, the TPOC, the head injury is reported, but let's say as part of his work comp claim, he actually alleged a foot injury, but that foot injury was denied and the carrier never made payments for it, but it's just being released as a part of the settlement as normal, since, as most of you are familiar with, these settlement agreements are very broad and they release any and all injuries, right? So you have that denied condition on the actual TPOC or on the actual record. So the question is, post-settlement, when Johnny Johnson goes to treat and he's treating for his head, what happens when he goes to treat for his foot that's denied? Is Medicare going to deny payment for that on the basis that, this carrier should be responsible for it? That would be interesting, right? Because the MSA that's prepared would only have treatment for the accepted code, the head, right? So Johnny Johnson could be out of luck if, CMS is looking at this TPOC field for all these potential codes and CMS inadvertently denies treatment for something that really Medicare should have paid for in the first place. So this is an interesting thing to watch out for too. Secondly, okay, so notification of the MSA will be sent to the beneficiary indicating the process for attestation and exhaustion. So as most of you know, when you go through the CMS submission process, you have the allocation, it's approved by CMS. The individual who the allocation is approved for, or the professional administrator, gives annual attestations that the funds are actually being used appropriately. This suggests to me that now not only is CMS looking for annual attestations on submitted allocations, but Medicare is looking for annual attestations on non-submitted allocations. These letters, we're not sure what these letters are going to look like too, because apparently Medicare is going to be sending these notification letters with information. This may confuse beneficiaries who, had allocations that didn't go through the formal CMS review and approval process. So there could be some confusion there. Thirdly, in-process WCMSAs will be updated to reflect that the voluntary WCMSA has been completed. So in-process WCMSAs is an internal term of art for CMS, where essentially if it's in process, it means that an MSA was submitted, but CMS hasn't been notified of, that settlement actually occurred. And then lastly, as Heather noted, these changes only apply to workers' compensation claims. So you're not going to be required to report any MSA that you obtain on, let's say, a liability case, for example. Okay, so additionally, CMS has said that there will be no changes to the response file layout. What CMS really means by this is there's not going to be a change in the response file layout or response that you receive from CMS when you report this WCM information to CMS, but there will be a change, obviously, in the input file layout. And the input file layout is going to include, obviously, those about 7 data points previously that we noted, like the MSA amount, MSA period, etc. Errors pertaining to this new WC information submitted will be returned as new soft or hard edits on the Section 111 NGHB claim response file, according to current processing standards. So there's going to be hard errors and soft errors. So, for example, if you have an MSA that's annuitized and you populate the field that it's being annuitized, you don't include anything about the, let's say, yearly amount or the initial deposit amount, those are going to cause errors. And then lastly, CMS says that additional details on these edits will be provided in future communications, because obviously this is just we're very early in the process, and we don't even know for sure if Medicare is actually going to roll this out for real. So testing, a bit of conflicting, confusing information here in CMS's written materials. They say that there's not going to be any sort of designated or special testing process, that there isn't one planned. There will still be testing, as there is with other large changes in Section 111 reporting policy. So testing is essentially going to occur as normal. Medicare is just not going to open up any sort of special testing process or procedure. Medicare has essentially said, if you want to test, it's going to be done as you would any other change, and you can get with your EDI rep on assistance and issues. And then lastly, timeframes here. So we have a time frame on the updated file layout when that's coming out. Medicare anticipates potentially early 2024. Maybe that's March, maybe that's April. We don't know for sure. Medicare anticipates testing in the fall of 2024. And then lastly, implementation really couldn't occur potentially until January of 2025. So more than a year from today. And again, these are all proposed timeframes. Medicare may or may not stick to these, so we will see how this develops.
Yeah, and it was interesting how on the webinar, Brendan, how they said, please don't hold us to these timeframes, because this is, I think it's more of a wish list for Medicare to accomplish this by then. But when you noted earlier that there's going to be changes to the input file, right? This will require technical development on behalf of responsible reporting entities, will it not? And so that's going to be it could be difficult. I know that there's a lot of other, technical changes that a lot of times REs want to make sure they're reporting properly. This requires IT assistance internally and changing in procedures, retraining your adjusters that you now not only need to report ORM and TPOC, but also the MSA information. I feel like it's a lot, and that potentially this might get pushed out a bit beyond 2025. What do you think?
Agreed. Yeah, for something like this where it seems small and the changes seem almost sort of common sense, but when you have this process in place where you've been reporting the same thing in the same way for, almost a decade, really, a change like this, that's going to take some getting used to. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if it took longer than 2025 for CMS to actually implement this. And obviously, too, during this period, Medicare conducted their presentation for the purpose of, one, obviously notifying the industry, but two, collecting responses. And so if the industry identifies issues with, the reporting, and so, for example, if we could, I don't know if we could do this, but the issue that I identified earlier about CMS potentially coordinating benefits on all ICD codes. I mean, maybe it would make sense, for example, if the industry provides comments and they say, hey, look, we know you have these 7 fields. What if you add a separate field to specifically designate, hey, this in this on this MSA, here's the MSA amount, here's the MSA period, but here in the MSA are the ICD codes that were being accepted, or here in the MSA, here are the ICD codes that were being denied. So maybe it makes sense for additional fields to be added to this just for clarity. So CMS doesn't, ruin someone's benefits.
For sure. I mean, I think in that nuance that you pointed out, that it's very common for work comp claims to allege everything but the kitchen sink. Of course, a carrier or self-insured entity is only going to accept what is actually compensable, and that's what's going in the MSA. And to your point, but however, work comp carriers are required to report everything that's alleged, and so they're going to use this to coordinate benefits. And that example you gave about Johnny earlier, I mean, I think that that's really unfortunate for the Medicare beneficiary. And so I think CMS needs to think about all the potential repercussions of this. Of course, we understand that they're just looking for more information. I think that what was interesting, and this question was asked on the webinar, Brendan, was that would this apply to those individuals that meet the reasonable expectation category as defined under the WCMSA reference guide, right? So those are those individuals that are within 30 months of Medicare eligibility. They've been applied for SSDI. They've been denied for SSDI. They're 62 and a half years of age or older, or otherwise reasonably expected to get on Medicare, right? Medicare has told us they expect MSAs to still be provided for work comp Medicare beneficiaries that are expected to be on Medicare within 30 months, but then they're not going to be able to report this because, as we know, Section 111 reporting only applies to current Medicare beneficiaries. If you
Yeah.
settle a claim with a reasonably expected person, right, that's not yet on Medicare, there's no reporting requirement. You might do an MSA, which is the appropriate thing to do if there's future care needed as a result of the injury, but Medicare is never going to know about it. So it would seem like they maybe would want to, implement some kind of separate self-reporting on reasonable expectation MSAs outside of the Section 111 process. But it completely misses that. And I think
Yeah.
almost discredits reasonable expectation MSAs a little bit. What do you seem like you got
Yeah, I
some
know.
comments there,
Yeah,
Brendan?
agreed. And I can totally see this causing this particular issue causing confusion in the industry, because some payers may think, okay, well, if there's no reporting requirement on these reasonable expectation claimants, then why would we have to get an MSA in the first place? So I could see people misinterpreting this guidance and simply just never getting an MSA in the first place, which would be completely incorrect.
Agreed. Agreed. And as Brendan mentioned earlier, CMS indicated that they would send notification of the reported work comp MSA information to the Medicare beneficiary, indicating the process for appropriate attestation and exhaustion. But I think that, as we talked about earlier, this might surprise a Medicare beneficiary. I wouldn't expect that most Medicare beneficiaries that are self-administering their MSA really are familiar with how to appropriately notify Medicare annually of how they've spent their MSA. The responsible reporting entities are probably going to get telephone calls from Medicare beneficiaries regarding the significance of this data, and they're going to need to talk them through this. So I think that's something that also, work comp payers need to also realize. And that also, the other thing we want to be clear is that in no way is this potential reporting requirement of work comp MSA information impacting non-submit MSAs. Medicare mentioned, as I spoke about earlier, numerous times referencing the CMS review process of MSAs is voluntary several times during this webinar. This does not represent any policy shift with respect to the validity of non-submit or evidence-based MSAs. Also, we don't believe this to be a direct attack against non-submit or evidence-based MSAs. CMS is simply looking just to have more information on both submitted MSAs as well as non-submitted MSAs. So we want to make sure to make that very clear. So one of the questions that was asked on the webinar was regarding if Medicare was going to require retroactive reporting of work comp MSA information. So let's say Medicare does actually implement this in January of 2025, which we don't think it'll be that soon, but we'll see. Would they require then for you to retroactively report settlements from 2024 and the MSAs involved there. They seem to not know the answer to that question. I don't think they'll go retroactive on this, Brendan. What do you think?
I agree. I think this will probably line up with the, I mean, although not related, the civil money penalty and how that's not going to be only going to be prospective in nature. I think this is going to be more or less the same. I don't think Medicare is going to expect that carriers go back in their data and repopulate old WCMSA information because the volume is just simply too high.
Agreed. And while you're mentioning civil money penalties, right? And I mentioned this early on when we started this presentation that Medicare just finalized their final rule with regard to civil money penalties for untimely reporting of TPOC and assumption of ORM. So what the final rule was essentially focused on the key areas in which Medicare is going to issue those penalties of up to $1,000 per day per claim. Really, the final rule really focused on untimely reporting of TPOC and of ORM. So technically, the way I see it, and let me know if you agree, Brendan, is that if and when CMS does implement this reporting requirement of MSA information, if a responsible reporting entity doesn't report the MSA information via Section 11, that would not cause a penalty.
Agreed. Yeah, I fully agree.
But it may be, that it because if they make it a required field, and if you get errors,
Right.
then
Then yeah, they make
potentially the transmission of the report is not going to go through
doesn't
until
go
that error
through.
is fixed. So in a way, even though you can't get a penalty, you still
Yeah.
can't complete your file submission of your
Yeah.
reporting unless you include that MSA information.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think the other point we want to say is that, Medicare seemed to indicate that this is something they would like to do, this reporting of MSA information. This was more of an expression of intent, this webinar. So we don't know that this for sure is a certainty. In my career in MSP over the last 15 years, I've seen many initiatives by CMS that don't always end up coming to fruition for whatever reason. They may receive a lot of pushback on this, but it's interesting. So I do want to make clear that to me, this is not a question. I don't think it's a certainty. I think that Medicare would like to push forward with this, but how and when and if and when they do is unknown. So at this point in time, nothing's really changing with regard to MSAs and how you're reporting. So we want to be clear on that. And we'll continue to keep you all posted as far as everything that we hear regarding this, these next steps on the reporting of MSA information. So again, I want to just, for those of you that might be new to Sanderson firm, we're a rapidly growing MSP compliance firm. While we are a law firm, we are a full suite MSP services vendor offering everything from traditional work comp MSAs to liability MSAs. Our indemnified non-submit MSA, which we call our IMSA, is one of our most popular MSA products, giving lots of cost savings, ease of settlement, and not having to wait for CMS approval. We also do evidence-based MSAs, which we submit to CMS for review and approval. We do all the Medicare conditional payment disputes and appeals with traditional and Medicare Advantage plans. We also are a Section 111 reporting agent to Medicare, so we can help you with your Section 111 reporting. We distinguish ourselves in that we provide unmatched data analysis and oversight on your data before you submit that information to Medicare. We're not just data in, data out. We want to make sure you're getting your data right, especially in light of the proposed rule. And being a law firm, myself, Brendan, and several other of our attorneys can provide attorney-client privilege legal advice and MSP guidance where needed. And we are just incredibly appreciative of you watching this presentation on the potential for Medicare to issue this guidance on reporting of MSA information through the Section 111 process. Stay tuned for more. We're going to find out about this, more information about this in 2024, certainly. So stay tuned. We would be happy to take your question and answers. If you have them, you'll see our email addresses on the screen here, heather@sandersoncomp.com, brendan@sandersoncomp.com. After you watch this recording and you have any questions whatsoever, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We would like to be a resource to you and answer any questions you might have. But with that, thank you so much for attending our presentation today. We greatly appreciate it and wishing you all a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.